Hi, my name is Katie Hodges. Welcome to my podcast. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. So, today I'm going to be going over a bunch of the ideas from The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. I've referenced this book a couple times, but I finished it last week, and so I wanted to go through a couple more ideas a little more clearly. Stuff like that. It's going to be really cool. So I made a bunch of notes, and I'm going to be reading some passages, some stuff that really hit me, and talking about it today. So something that I struggle with a lot, obviously, is emotions. One of the great things I learned first of all, or one of the things that kind of hit me when I was listening to an impact theory podcast, was distrust your emotions. And I'd heard the phrase before, feelings aren't facts. And that was really helpful to me at a time in my life. But this specifically, where you distrust your emotions, to me, it has more nuance to it. Meaning, it's not just, okay, your feelings might not be real or they might not be valid. It's distrust your emotions. So instead of acting or reacting when you feel something, stop and take a minute to wonder why you're really getting a strong feeling about something. Why are you getting upset when someone says something? Usually it's because it triggers an insecurity, for me at least. But we don't really stop to think about that. We don't stop and think about that in the moment. We simply act on the feelings that we have. So that was something that was really helpful for me, and Mark Manson talks about it a bit in this book. So he says, emotions are simply biological signals designed to nudge you in the direction of beneficial change. Emotions are part of the equation of our lives, but not the entire equation. Just because something feels good doesn't mean that it actually is good. Just because something feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. Emotions are merely signposts, suggestions that our neurobiology gives us, but not commandments. Therefore, we shouldn't always trust our own emotions. In fact, I believe we should make a habit of questioning them. Question your emotions. It's such a valid and powerful tip. I can't remember who said the quote, but it was Shakespeare. Nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So we often misinterpret situations. We often misinterpret other people. We often misinterpret our own emotions and feelings. I can't tell you how many times my emotions have gotten me into trouble. I mean, more than I can count. And this idea that emotions are simply a biological signal sent to us and that their choice was really powerful to me, because I've always struggled to control my emotions, and I've usually been ruled by them my whole life. They have great power over me, and I don't want to be a slave to my emotions. I don't want to be a slave to my reactions. So this thought process really helped me a lot, and it's super hard to practice. Just saying that from experience. I'm still terrible at it, and I've literally been thinking this almost every day for a year. And just thinking it doesn't make it so. And I've made some huge strides in actively practicing it, but it's not foolproof. But I can say, in the times that I did take that step to wonder why I was feeling something, and then look at the facts or look at the person, I was able to separate that and act more rationally. So it does work. Hopefully soon enough I'll have a quicker quicker time in recognizing that, because it's so easy to say in hindsight that we were wrong, or that maybe we shouldn't have reacted so quickly to something. It's really hard to do in the moment. So that's something I'm working on every day. Another idea is the idea of being average or mediocre. And this is something that really helped me, because I was always trying to be extraordinary, or trying to be special, or trying to be talented at something. And that was the thing that I was going to do. I was always waiting to be great at something. And I was always so scared of being normal or average. And I realized early on in life that I'll never be normal. And that was both a blessing and a curse. But I just definitely didn't want to be average. I always felt this strong yearning for something more than what I was doing. And I always felt this pull towards doing something really big and great. But that scared me, because it meant that I had to be some sort of extraordinary super person. And deep down, I knew that I wasn't special. And that didn't bother me so much. But what bothered me was that I thought you had to be special to accomplish great things. I thought you had to be special to make your dreams come true. I thought you had to be special in order for anybody to love you. I thought you had to be special in order to love yourself. And I'm finding that that's just not true. And that being average is actually kind of a blessing. So I tell myself, stop trying to be right or extraordinary. Instead, focus on getting better, and getting better only. Focus on what you need to do to learn and grow. Mark talks about this in the book. He says, a lot of people are afraid to accept mediocrity because they believe that if they accept it, they'll never achieve anything, never improve, and that their life won't matter. Tom Bilyeu says, we're all hopelessly average. So that made me think, people who become extraordinary at something long term and sustain it don't believe they are special or exceptional. And then Manson says, on the contrary, they become amazing because they're obsessed with improvement. And that obsession with improvement stems from an erring belief that they are in fact not that great at all. It's anti-entitlement. People who become great at something become great because they understand that they're not already great. They are mediocre, they are average, but that they could be so much better. So self-awareness is something that I've talked about a little bit, but it's definitely one of the keys to just starting any sort of journey of internal growth. If you have no awareness, then you can't recognize your strengths, your weaknesses, where you need to improve. You can't gain clarity on your values or your goals. So self-awareness is essential, because any improvement you want to make means that you really have to look inward at all of the things that make you feel like you're not good enough. You have to look inward on all the failures that you have and what you learn from them. And all of these are hard if you can't be honest with yourself. And if you can't take a minute to recognize your thoughts, your feelings, and evaluate them without being emotional about it. So this book talks about this a lot, and he makes some great points. So I'm mostly just going to read these off because, he couldn't have said it more perfect. Self-awareness is like an onion. There are multiple layers to it, and the more you peel them back, the more likely you're starting you're going to start crying at inappropriate times. Let's say the first layer of self-awareness is the simple understanding of one's emotions. We all have emotional blind spots. Often they have to do with the emotions that we were taught were inappropriate growing up. It takes years of practice and effort to get good at identifying blind spots in ourselves and then expressing the affected emotions appropriately. But the task is hugely important and worth the effort. The second layer of awareness is the ability to ask why we feel certain emotions. These why questions are difficult. They often take months, even years to answer consistently and accurately. Most people need to go to some sort of therapist just to hear these questions asked for the first time. Such questions are important because they illuminate what we consider success or failure. Why do we feel angry? Is it because you failed to achieve some goal? Why do you feel lethargic and uninspired? Is it because you don't think you're good enough? This layer of questioning helps us to understand the root of these emotions that overwhelm us constantly. Once we understand the root cause, we can ideally do something to change it. This level of self awareness, which takes constant questioning and effort, is incredibly difficult to reach. But it's not the most important because our values are the natures of our problems. The nature of our problems determines the quality of our lives. For many people, this passes as self-awareness. And yet, if they were able to go deeper and look at their underlying values, they would see that their original analysis was based on avoiding responsibility for their own problem, rather than accurately identifying the problem. They would see that their decision is based on chasing highs and not generating true happiness. There are a handful of common values that really create problems for people, problems that can hardly be solved. So let's go over some of them. Pleasure. Pleasure is a false god. Research shows that people who focus their energy on superficial pleasures end up more anxious, more emotionally unstable, and more depressed. I can validate that right now from experience. Pleasure is not the cause of happiness. Rather, it is the effect. If you get the other stuff right, other values and metrics, then pleasure will naturally occur as a byproduct. Material success. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Always being right. As humans, we're wrong pretty much constantly. So if your metric of success for life is to be right, well, you're going to have a difficult time rationalizing all the bullshit to yourself. The fact is, people who base their self-worth on being right about everything prevent themselves from learning from their mistakes. They lack the ability to take on new perspectives and empathize with others. They close themselves off to new and important information. Staying positive. Denying negative emotions leads to experiencing deeper and more prolonged negative emotions and leads to emotional dysfunction. Constant positivity is a form of avoidance, not a valid solution for life's problems. Problems which, by the way, if you're choosing the right values and metrics, should be invigorating to you and motivating you. The trick with negative emotions is 1. To express them in a socially acceptable and healthy manner. 2. Express them in a way that aligns with your values. Remember, emotions are just feedback. When we deny our problems, we rob ourselves the chance to solve them and generate happiness. Problems add a sense of meaning and importance to our lives. He goes on next to talk about good and bad values. And when I was reading this, it hit me really hard. And because I talk about values all the time, I can't stress them enough, actually. Um, every time something hits me when it comes to this, it gives me a deeper understanding of clarity in my own life, in my own head, and what I put stock into of how I judge myself, of how I judge my self-worth, and of how I prioritize my life. So For me right now, it's about recognizing my values, the ones I've chosen, the ones that were conditioned into me that I never realized were there, and to fight back against any of the ones that don't serve me and bring me closer towards my goal. So I had some thoughts when I was reading this. Defining your values and creating clarity in your life is the ultimate cheat code to building consistency towards your goals, and also actually changing and becoming the person you want to be but aren't yet. You have to know what drives you and why you're doing something, and that's why values are so important to me. I make it a point every day to continue to think about and figure out my values. It takes conscious effort and conscious effort in the beginning. But if you practice it enough, you can actually embody those values in your everyday life. Those are the values that you choose. You can actually become and embody those values and become the person who has those values if you choose to. You are the values you have. Your values drive you. You can choose your values. You can choose the person you want to be and how you show up in the world and how you carry yourself as you do it. So the book talks about good and bad values and gives some examples. Good values are 1, reality based, 2, socially constructive, 3, immediate and controllable. Bad values are 1, superstitious, 2, socially destructive, and 3, not immediate or controllable. You'll notice that good, healthy values are achieved internally. You simply have to orient your mind in a way to experience it. These values are immediate and controllable and engage you with the world as it is rather than the way you wish it were. Values are about prioritization. The question is your priorities. What are the values you prioritize above everything else, and therefore influence your decision making more than anything else? This is so interesting. So this is why values are so important to me. So important. Because the values that you either choose or that are conditioned within you that you didn't choose and don't even realize you have, these values are what, like I said, drive you. But what drives you is also the basis of your frame of reference. These values affect your decision making every single day in every macro and micro decision that you make. So recognizing that and recognizing that you also have a choice means you have a choice of how you interpret the world. You have a choice of how you react to somebody when they upset you. You have a choice of how to feel when something tragic happens. When we have poor values, that is, poor standards by which we judge ourselves, set for ourselves and others, we are essentially giving fucks about the things that don't matter, things that in fact make our life worse. But when we choose better values, we are able to divert our fucks to something better, towards things that matter, things that improve our state of well-being and generate happiness, pleasure, and success as a side effect, instead of focusing on them. This, in a nutshell, is what self-improvement is really about. Prioritizing better values, choosing better things to give a fuck about. Because when you give better fucks, you get better problems. And when you get better problems, you get a better life. First, we'll look at the next chapter, which is a radical form of responsibility. Taking responsibility for everything that occurs in your life. Everything. Regardless of who's at fault. The second is uncertainty, the acknowledgement of one's own ignorance and the cultivation of constant doubt in your beliefs. Distrust your emotions, doubt your beliefs. The next is failure. The willingness to discover your own flaws and mistakes so that they may be improved upon. The fourth is rejection. The ability to both say and hear no, thus clearly defining what you will and will not accept in your life. So, one of the first little points he mentioned there was responsibility. Often, the only difference between a problem being painful or powerful is the sense that we choose it and are responsible for it. If you're miserable in your current situation, chances are it's because you feel like some part of it is outside of your control, that there's a problem you have no ability to solve, or a problem that was somehow thrust upon you without your choosing. I also thought of this. Or if we know the problem is our fault and the guilt cycle leads us to learned helplessness. This is what I went through. And so when I discovered radical responsibility or accountability or ownership or whatever term you like to use, it really changed my life. The idea of ownership has changed my life. The realization hit me like lightning. Being radically responsible for your actions and emotions in your entire life, no matter what the circumstances, even if they are not your fault. One of the most important mindset changes I think everybody should adopt. Almost every problem I've struggled with mentally and emotionally for the last few years could have just been solved if I at least just realized that I am the only person responsible for my feelings and what I perceive and how I interpret the people in the world around me. The moment I realized this, I immediately didn't feel victimized anymore. It was no longer what happened to me or what someone did to me or hurt me or the people I've lost or any of that other shit situation. That was the problem. It was me. It was how I was choosing to interpret or view or react to these stimulus. This meant that the pain wasn't out of my control. It meant I didn't have to be miserable if I didn't want to. If I just simply took responsibility for it all being my fault and took responsibility for my own misery, I took my power back. This changed my life. I know it sounds silly saying that everything is my fault. Like, if I got hit by a car tomorrow, nobody would think that was my fault. And yet, it sounds silly, but the way I'm starting to choose to view the world is that it's all my fault because it's all my responsibility. I was so lost and so broken because I just felt like the world was happening to me. And I didn't understand why other people made certain decisions or said certain things or did what they did. I didn't understand why I was getting hurt all the time. I didn't understand why life was throwing so many curveballs all at once and it felt like I was drowning. It's because I didn't take responsibility for my own feelings or well-being. I was entitled. And I didn't even really realize it. But I gave all of my power away by trying to find happiness outside of me, whether it was going out to eat or shopping or, pretty much anything where I avoid the real issue. And the real issue is that no one is responsible for my happiness, my well-being, and my emotional health but me. And I have to take care of that for myself before I can take care of anything else in my life. And the only way that I know how to do that, or that I deeply feel is working in my life after all the millions of things that I have tried over the years, is ownership. It's taking full responsibility for yourself, for your life, for your actions. How we interpret other people is our responsibility. How many fights could I have avoided in my life with friends, family, loved ones, partners, if instead of getting upset, I had taken responsibility for why I was upset instead of blaming somebody else? Asking these questions of why me will lead you nowhere because you will never find the answers. But the truth is it doesn't matter why you. It only matters how you choose to respond to it. So Mark Manson says this: There's a simple realization from which all personal improvement and growth emerges. This realization that we, individually, are responsible for everything in our lives, no matter the external circumstances. We don't always control what happens to us, but we always control how we interpret what happens to us, as well as how we respond. Whether we consciously recognize it or not, we are all responsible for our own experiences. It's impossible not to be. It's still your responsibility to interpret the meaning of an event and choose a response. Whether we like it or not, we are always taking an active role in what's occurring to and within us. We are always interpreting the meaning of every moment and every occurrence. We are always choosing the values by which we live and the metrics by which we measure everything that happens to us. Often the same event can be good or bad, depending on the metrics we choose. The point is, we are always choosing whether we recognize it or not. Always. The real question is, what are we choosing to give a fuck about? What values are we choosing to base our actions on? What metrics are we choosing to measure our life? Are these good choices, values, or metrics? This is the basic formula that I've been using kind of all year. I drew from a lot of different places to get this because I hadn't read this book yet, but it's true. I have so much anxiety because I choose to care so much about so many things that don't matter. That's why it's called the subtle art of giving a fuck, because it's about choice. And nobody can give a fuck about absolutely nothing, but chances are that you're giving a fuck about way too much shit that isn't immediate or important. So, starting to realize that I have a choice and that I only have so much room in my life and my emotional health for healthy action meant I had to start to prioritize my problems as well as my goals. And when he talks about values, what are we choosing to base our actions on? So this goes back to those values. Values drive us. If you don't know what your values are, if you don't know the kind of person that you are deep inside, or you're not embodying the values of the person you want to be, you'll be driven by subconscious values that you don't even know are driving you. Ones that were most likely conditioned by your experiences, your upbringing, the people around you, the TV you watch, the books you read, your friends, your family. This means that you are not in control of your own life. You're not in control of your own mind. You're not in control of your own body. You're basically not in control of anything, and you're just running through life reacting to everything without knowing why. I lived that life, and it's miserable. It makes you feel like you can never get out of it, like you'll never get ahead. So by simply realizing that you're driven by values, whether you chose them or not, is the first step. Because once you realize that, and that is true for all humans in all time, across the entire world, no matter who you are, where you were born, it's true for everybody. We are all driven by these internal values. It's how we choose to define them, or the ones that mean the most to us, that are unique to us. Metrics. Metrics are so important because they are what tell me if I'm actually improving or not. I create a checklist, and instead of trying to schedule every single little thing on at the same exact time every week on every day, which is really hard for me because I lead a really busy, spontaneous life. Instead, I chose to make a checklist of how many things I needed to do in the week and how often I needed to do them. So how many hours do I have to read and research for this podcast? How many hours do I have to write for this podcast? How many hours do I have to write on my book? How many hours do I have to devote to health and meals and working out and self-care? How many hours do I have to devote to my family? How many hours do I have to devote to household duties? These kind of things. And I made a checklist, and all I do is I check a box. And at the end of the week, Out of 75 boxes, I can see how many I hit. So I can judge right there, no matter if I felt good that week, bad that week, was I productive? Did I hit my marks? And I can judge myself on those very black and white metrics. You know, other metrics that are harder to find are, so when you're talking about action reaction and how you interpret situations, a good metric could be, so after you react to somebody, no matter what the situation, it could simply be just responding to a comment. It could be something that triggers you and makes you angry. It could be something really positive that they say. However you respond, think about how it makes you feel after. Do you feel good? Do you feel nothing? Do you feel satisfied? Do you feel excited? Or do you feel guilty or regretful or angry? It's simply having this awareness. And then once you align your values, the metrics give you the ability to realize whether you're living in line with those values and to what extent. Because a lot of the times people live in nuance, people live in the gray. It's not are you or are you not completely, it's how much are you adhering. So he wraps it up by saying, the more we choose to accept responsibility in our lives, the more power we will exercise over our lives. Accepting responsibility for our problems is the first step to solving them. How can you solve something you have no power over? If everything is everybody else's fault, what can you do to fix that? Nothing. You have no control over everybody else. What you can control is how you react to these situations, how you carry yourself through the struggles, and how it makes you feel when you're alone. You know, are you constantly feeling hurt? Are you constantly feeling neglected? You know, are you constantly feeling like nobody understands you? These are all things that we need to take responsibility for, but it's so easy to blame others for. I've done it. I've done it so much. Almost every time I've been depressed or fallen off for a few months and just hid from the world, it's almost always because I wasn't taking responsibility for my actions. I was giving the power away to somebody else by feeling hurt. And the only thing that does is give that other person power over my life. Or if I hid from something or didn't try something new because I was fearful, all that's doing is giving that fear power over my well-being, my potential, my happiness. So then there's always people that are like, oh, but it wasn't my fault. This happened to me. So he says there are also problems that we aren't at fault for, yet we are still responsible for them. So once again, just drilling it into myself, I was thinking, we're responsible for how we choose to interpret and act and react to a problem that is not our fault. There is no way to get around this. Fighting it will only make you miserable because it will cause you to live in a victim mentality. If nothing is your responsibility, then everything is just randomly happening to you, and there's nothing you can do to control your own life or outcomes. There's nothing you can do to change it, and you will feel helpless and broken and confused. Responsibility is a choice, Mark says. Nobody else is ever responsible for your situation but you. Many people may be to blame for your unhappiness, but nobody is ever responsible for your unhappiness but you. This is because you always get to choose how you see things, how you react to things, how you value things. You always get to choose the metric by which to measure your experiences. This realization rocked my world. Because this means even in your darkest times, even when you feel like everybody is against you, the world is against you, the punches never stop coming, you still have power. You still have value. You just have to choose to exercise it. But taking responsibility for our problems is far more important because that's where real learning comes from. That's where real life improvement comes from. To blame others is simply to hurt yourself. Killing it. So he gives this great example, and it's about a man who lost his son. His son passed away, and he ended up contacting Mark Manson, basically saying that he has no idea what that pain feels like. And he said, you're right. And this is a really extreme situation. No one would ever choose to go through this extreme pain. Like, the most extreme pain that anybody could think about is losing a child. However, unpopular opinion, but this is what he said. The responsibility for coping with that loss was given to him, even though it was clearly and understandably unwanted. Despite all of that, he is still responsible for his own emotions, his own beliefs, and actions. How he reacted to his son's death is his own choice. Oof. Unpopular opinion, right? It sounds super cold, but it's actually so beautiful. Taking responsibility actually allows you to heal. Without it, that pain controls you. It lives inside of you. It bursts out at random times when you get triggered or you stub your toe, and then, you yell at your loved ones or whoever's closest to you. You may be reminded and then of, the person you lost, and then your day or your week is ruined. It may not be your fault that it happened to you, but it is your responsibility how you deal with it, no matter what the circumstances are. You are the only person who has control over how you act and react to a situation. I struggle with this, and it still takes me a minute to dial back my reactions and second guess myself, but it's coming so much easier nowadays because I have so many opportunities daily, because I'm such an anxious, short-tempered person, to test this theory. And I'm telling you from experience, the second you realize that you're giving your power away and you choose to take it back, it may feel like your heart is breaking for a second, but it fills you with this sense of pride. And that was one of the first things that I held on to, because I hadn't felt good about anything in a really long time. But taking my power back was so important to me, even just getting out of bed in the morning. So nobody likes the word victim. I doubt that many people think of themselves as a victim. But chances are, if you're not practicing extreme ownership or radical responsibility or accountability for yourself, however you want to say it, chances are you have a victim mindset and you don't even know it. So why do we do it then? If most of us don't think we're victims, how are we actually living in a victim mentality every single day? And how are we choosing this victim mentality? So the book says, responsibility/fault fallacy allows people to pass the responsibility for solving their problems onto others. This ability to alleviate responsibility through blame puts a temporary high and feeling of moral righteousness. You are already choosing in every moment of every day what to give a fuck about. So, change is as simple as choosing to give a fuck about something else. These are all effects of changing your values, the values you're given, but they're inevitable. Being right is something that is, I would go so far as to say, human nature. The desire to want to be right. I think it stems from how much we need validation, or how much self-worth we have internally. I would say I definitely used to want to be right, but I don't even think it was that so much. I really wanted to be heard. I wanted to be understood. So I never really put all my stock in being right because I never really thought I was right half the time anyway. But when it came to myself, I always knew that I was misunderstood, whether it was because I wasn't saying things properly or because people just weren't listening. So I see this a lot with people, though, especially in society today. Everybody wants to be right. Everybody wants to argue. Everybody wants this I'm better than you mentality, and it's my way or the highway. And the truth is that I find that the most stimulating conversations are when you don't even necessarily have to agree, but you can respect somebody else's opinion, even if you want to have a riveting conversation and push back on it a little. It's one of the reasons I'm really excited to start the interviews for this podcast, is because I don't want to be right. I want to learn. I want to grow. But I also love the idea of waffling a bunch of topics back and forth and hearing people's different opinions, you know, whether we compromise and grow through it or not, even just having a conversation where two people with opposing views can sit there and not end up punching each other or screaming at each other or leaving nasty comments online. Like, I could do that all day long. It's so invigorating to me. And I really don't understand people these days. I don't think I've ever understood people in general, but how divided everybody is, how closed-minded everybody is. It's really hard for me to understand this point of view, and I'm making it a point to try and understand people better. But to me, if you don't have a growth mindset, if you don't think that you can change and other people can change, if you think you're just set in stone and you can't get any better and you're, prideful about it, it's really hard for me to connect with people like that. And I find that that's most people. Most people are so scared to be wrong, because they put so much identity into being right. And I don't know if being wrong makes them feel like a failure, or if by trying to learn something new, they feel worthless. I don't really understand it. But hopefully someday I'll get it. So, back to the book. Growth is an endlessly initiative process. We learn something new. We don't go from wrong to right, rather we go from wrong to slightly less wrong. We are always in the process of approaching truth and perfection without actually ever reaching perfection. We shouldn't seek to find the ultimate right answer for ourselves, but rather we should seek to chip away at the ways that we're wrong today so we can be a little less wrong tomorrow. This is amazing to me because this journey is so hard for me, so hard, because I want to be better right now. So just being a little less shitty than I was yesterday, just being a little less depressed than I was yesterday, just being in a little bit better shape than I was yesterday is so much more powerful than needing to meet a high standard right now. Because this puts value in the process and it puts value in discipline and having an open mind instead of an outcome. Because outcomes can change. Some outcomes are unattainable and you don't even know it. Or many people become so obsessed with being right about their life that they never actually end up living it. Certainty is the enemy of growth. That's why accepting the inevitable imperfections of our values is necessary for growth to take place. You can't grow without awareness and taking responsibility for yourself. It just won't happen. You can't grow by blaming every circumstance or blaming every other person. Instead of striving for certainty, we should be in constant search of doubt, doubting our own beliefs, doubt about our feelings, doubt about what the future may hold for us unless we get out there and create it for ourselves. Instead of looking to be right all the time, we should be looking at where we're wrong all the time, because we are. Being wrong opens us up to the possibility of change. Being wrong brings the opportunity for growth. If I didn't realize that my depression was all my fault, no matter what caused it, I never would have gotten out of it. If I didn't realize that my feelings and my reactions were wrong and that they put me in that situation and I dug that hole for myself, I never would have climbed out of it. If I didn't realize that I was falling short of the person that I wanted to be and that I was completely mistaken of the person I thought I was, I never would have been able to look at the differences of who I actually was and the person I want to be, the person I'm trying to be now, and able to change it. It's as simple as that. Here's something that's weird but true. We don't actually know what a positive or negative experience is. Some of the most difficult and stressful moments in our lives also end up being the most formative and motivating. Some of the best and most gratifying experiences of our lives end up being the most distracting and demotivating. Don't trust your conception of positive or negative experiences. All that we know for certain is what hurts in the moment and what doesn't, and that's not worth much. Distrust your emotions. Some of the hardest times of my life, like I'm sure for most people, have ended up with me having to change the most. I wouldn't wish anything that I've gone through on anybody. And I'm not saying my problems are any worse or better than anybody else's, but they're mine alone. However, everything that I've been through, every single time, I learned something from it. And although I wish that there are a lot of things in my life that never happened, I can't say that it was worthless or that I regret it or regret going through it. You know, I have a lot of regrets in life, but I'm trying to view this through a different frame of reference. And the frame of reference isn't what I did or what someone else did, or the fact that I got depressed, or the fact that I was unproductive or lazy or sad. It's the tools that I found to get me out of that mindset, get me out of that situation. Mindset is everything. When I read Mindset by Dweck, it was a huge game changer for me. Having a growth mindset, realizing, is kind of the first step to realizing all this stuff, I think. It's really hard to have awareness. It's really hard to see where you're wrong if you have a fixed mindset. And that basically means that you think that people are unchangeable, that situations are unchangeable, that you can't learn or grow anymore. And changing my mindset, changing my frame of reference, the way by which I view and interpret the world, and the way I view and interpret myself, opened up my eyes to endless possibilities of steps and that I could take and skills that I could master to literally completely change my entire life. If I work at this hard enough, I can be an entirely different person. I mean, completely different person, inside and out. The way I think, the way I feel, the foods I like. I could change anything about myself with mindset and discipline. Responsibility gives me the power to act. You feel so alone and so lost and so hopeless when you blame others for your circumstances. I was sick of feeling weak. I was sick of feeling hopeless. I was sick of feeling lost. And the second that I realized that I couldn't control anybody else in my life and that no one else was going to make me happy, and that it was my responsibility alone, no matter what has happened to me, it gave me hope. It gave me hope in a way that I hadn't felt in a really, really long time, if ever. And that hope was all that I needed to pick up a book and just try something new. You know, this whole journey is about trying new things. Not everything that works for me is going to work for somebody else. That's why I read dozens of books. That's why I watch dozens of podcasts, because certain things work and certain things don't. The whole goal of this for me is to find out what those things are at this point. Once I create a lot of clarity in my life, once I realize the tools that really do help me, once I realize the things I have to take responsibility for, and once I realize with complete clarity what my values are and the person that I want to be, all I have to do is consistently act to change it. Well, thanks for coming to my podcast, guys. Happy Thanksgiving. See you guys next week.